Hey guys, so tonight we're sliding quietly into one of the softest corners of medieval history. The kind of thing nobody tells you about, because everyone is too busy talking about knights, or castles, or plagues. But honestly, this is way more interesting if you're lying down, getting sleepy, maybe adjusting your pillow like a medieval monk, adjusting his itchy wool robe. Because we're talking about memory. Yeah, memory. But not like, oh no, I forgot why I walked into the kitchen. I mean the super secret memory techniques that medieval monks used when there was no Google, no Notes app, no remind me tomorrow at 7 a.m. to pray, just pure mind power, brain muscles, and endless hours of sitting in cold stone rooms trying not to fall asleep during chanting. Imagine a long corridor in an old monastery lit with candles that flicker like the RI, also struggling with the concept of staying awake. You hear quiet footsteps, maybe the soft rustle of parchment, and the smell of old wood, ink, and slightly damp stone. And somewhere in one of those rooms, a monk is learning the entire book of Psalms by heart, and he doesn't have flashcards, no sticky notes, just his brain, and a wild memory trick that honestly feels like something a YouTube productivity guru would brag about today. So let's just drift into it slowly. Imagine you're walking into a medieval monastery. It's early morning, so early that even the sun is like, bro, 5 more minutes. The grass is wet, the air is cool, and somewhere, somebody is ringing a bell with the exact level of enthusiasm you would expect from a guy who has to wake up at 3:45 a.m. every day. You go inside, kind of expecting dramatic chanting, but instead everything is calm, quiet, peaceful, almost like a natural sleep aid. And honestly, that's perfect for tonight. Now monks spend most of their time reading, copying books, praying, and trying not to commit sins like thinking too much about food. But one thing they had to master was remembering things. Lots of things. Because books were handmade, rare, expensive, and also kind of heavy to carry around. So instead of saying, let me check chapter 3 real quick, they just memorized entire books, like whole books, plural, and the trick they used. It's something called the memory palace. Maybe you've heard of it in modern videos, like Hack Your Brain in 5 minutes. Except the monks were doing it 900 years ago, while wearing sandals in winter. The memory palace technique is basically creating an imaginary building inside your head. You pick a place you know really well, your home, your street, the monastery courtyard, then you mentally place ideas or information in different spots. So if you needed to remember a prayer, you might imagine it lying dramatically on a bench. If you needed to remember a list, maybe you'd imagine each item sitting on a staircase. And whenever you needed to recall it, you'd walk through that imaginary place and look at what you placed there. It's like turning your brain into a medieval IKEA, except everything is free and nothing requires assembly. Now, monks didn't just use this in a casual, oh cool kind of way. They treated memory like a spiritual exercise. For them, remembering wasn't just about convenience, it was about devotion. The more you remembered, the more prepared you were to pray, teach, or look extremely impressive during long discussions where everyone else was pretending to understand Latin. And if you messed up, well, nobody was going to yell at you, but you'd probably get a disappointed sigh from Brother Matthew, the guy who memorized half the Bible before breakfast. The cool thing is that the monks didn't always start learning the memory palace from books. Most of it was taught person to person, by older monks who had spent decades training their minds. They'd sit the younger monks down, probably in a drafty room with one squeaky wooden stool, and they'd say something like, picture a hallway, and the younger monks would nod very seriously, even though half of them were mentally building a hallway that looked suspiciously like the kitchen. But it didn't matter. The imagination was the point. The technique was so powerful that some monks could remember things with ridiculous accuracy. Like, I know exactly which paragraph is on the left side of page 38 level accuracy. That's not a joke. They trained their memory so deeply that their minds worked like internal bookshelves. Some even used visual images that were so dramatic, so weird, or so funny that you had to remember them. Because the brain loves weird things. So if you ever hear that a monk remembered a list by imagining a rooster wearing a crown and holding a harp, yeah, that tracks. And it wasn't just religious text. They memorized medicine, astronomy, law, plant knowledge, geography, basically anything that you couldn't Google, because Google was just a bunch of monks humming softly in the Scriptorium. Let's just pause here for a second and imagine the atmosphere. The slow scratching of quills, the cold stone under your feet, candles doing their best impression of staying alive. A single monk quietly whispering to himself because he's walking through his mental palace. Maybe he's imagining a hallway filled with floating scrolls. Maybe he's imagining his childhood home, but with each room holding a different chapter of a book. Maybe the bathroom in his memory palace has a giant glowing letter of the alphabet in it, for reasons he refuses to explain. And all of this is happening completely silently, while everyone else is copying manuscripts. Now, if you're getting sleepy, that's normal. Monks lived in a world designed for sleep. Soft chanting, warm cloaks, long silent nights, steady routines, dim candlelight. It was basically medieval ASMR, and the memory palace fit perfectly into that environment because it required calm, focus, and imagination, all the things that make your mind slow down and get cozy. But the secret part, the part people almost never mention, is that the monks didn't just use memory palaces, they used memory journeys to be. Instead of imagining a building, they imagined walking along a path, maybe through the monastery gardens, or around the village, or across fields. And every landmark on the way stored a piece of information. So your memory wasn't just a palace, it was a walk, a journey, a mental pilgrimage. And the cool thing is that journeys are easier to remember because we're naturally good at remembering places. Imagine walking down a small dirt path outside the monastery. The sun is low, the air is cool, and everything is quiet. You pass the apple tree. That's where you store the first idea. You reach the old wooden fence. That holds the second idea. Then the little bridge over the creek. Third idea. By the time you get to the pond, you've already walked through an entire chapter. And when you walk the path again in your imagination, everything comes back in order. It's kind of beautiful, and also kind of genius. And slowly, as the night gets quieter, you can imagine those monks sitting with their thoughts, building entire worlds inside their minds. Tiny universes filled with symbols and stories and ideas. Worlds nobody else could see, but that guided everything they did. And that's kind of the magic of it. And we're just getting started. And as you settle into this quiet medieval atmosphere, you start to notice how much time monks spent just thinking. Not dramatic thinking with hand gestures and pacing like a philosopher in a movie. More like slow, peaceful, steady thinking. The kind you do when you're half awake, staring at nothing, letting your mind wander wherever it wants. For monks, that wandering had purpose. It built their inner memory worlds. And honestly, it's kind of soothing imagining them doing this every day, almost like mental gardening. Picture a monk sitting on a small wooden stool, the kind that always looks uncomfortable, but somehow everyone in the Middle Ages tolerated it. He's leaning slightly forward, elbows on knees, eyes unfocused, just letting his imagination build a room inside his head. Maybe it's a stone room, maybe it's a sunny courtyard. Maybe it says something completely random like a room full of floating fish, because that's just how memory tricks worked sometimes. Whatever he imagines, it's deliberate, calm, slow, no rush. Time moves differently in the monastery anyway. And every detail matters. The color of the stone, the sound of footsteps, where the sunlight lands. The monks believed that the more details you added to your mental space, the easier it was to attach memories to it. You weren't just memorizing words, you were placing them inside a living, breathing world. Your own private mental building that grew bigger every day. And because monks lived in a world full of silence, they had all the time in the world to fill their memory palaces with strange, vivid images that practically glued themselves into their minds. Sometimes the imagery was shockingly dramatic, because the human brain loves drama. If a monk needed to remember a line from scripture, he might imagine a giant golden letter floating in the air, or a lion gently carrying a scroll in its mouth, or a candle glowing so bright it lights up an entire imaginary hallway. Anything unusual helped stick the memory in place. The weirder it was, the better it worked. And yes, some monks definitely imagined things like giant chickens or glowing angels doing backflips. Nobody wrote those down, but come on, someone must have. Back in the real world, the monastery around them stayed calm. The air always had a mixture of candle smoke, herbs, and a little bit of wet stone. Somewhere outside, a bell would occasionally ring, echoing through the hallways. And every so often, you'd hear the soft sound of a quill against parchment. That slow, scratch, 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 that makes you feel like you're in a cozy library. It's such a peaceful sound that even now, in your imagination, you can almost hear it. And what's even more interesting is that the monks didn't think of memory as just a tool. They thought of it as a moral responsibility. A trained memory meant a disciplined mind. A disciplined mind meant a focused heart. And a focused heart meant a peaceful soul. So for them, memory wasn't just, oh, I need to remember this. It was a way to connect with meaning, purpose, and the divine. Kind of like mindfulness meditation, but with more wool robes and fewer yoga mats. So now imagine it again, a monk walking very slowly through a garden path, early morning fog still hovering over the grass. His hands are tucked inside his sleeves, because apparently sleeves back then were like tiny portable blankets. He isn't just walking, he's traveling through a mental landscape. Maybe the rosebush he passes holds the memory of a psalm. Maybe the stone bench holds a piece of a sermon. The wooden gate, maybe that holds a story about a saint. Each spot on the path is a memory anchor, so he doesn't just see the garden. He sees a map of ideas. And when he closes his eyes later, alone in his cell, he'll walk the path again in his mind. Slow steps, soft breathing. He'll pause at the rosebush, let the memory surface, then the bench, then the gate, one by one, like turning pages without touching a single book. It's kind of beautiful, really, like a quiet journey without going anywhere, perfect for falling asleep, or for remembering things that matter. Now, the memory palace wasn't invented by monks, they borrowed it from ancient thinkers, but the medieval monks took it to a whole new level. They made it spiritual, they made it structured, and they used it to hold enormous amounts of knowledge, way more than we'd expect from people who spent half their day chanting, gardening, or trying to avoid accidentally breaking extremely strict monastic rules, like no talking after a certain hour or don't eat too much bread, or else. Some monks were so good at the memory palace that people thought they had supernatural levels of intelligence, when really they were just using techniques that worked ridiculously well. And the funny thing is, these methods still work today. If you start imagining your own memory palace while lying in bed tonight, you might be surprised by how quickly your brain jumps on board. The mind loves places, it loves images, it loves stories. And monks knew this long before neuroscience existed. Inside the Scriptorium, where most of the thinking and copying happened, the atmosphere would stay steady and peaceful. Wooden desks lined up, each with parchment that was smoothed and scraped until it felt soft like skin. Ink pots, feather quills trimmed over and over again, candles flickering as if they were whispering secrets, a window somewhere letting in a soft grey light. Everything in the room felt like it moved slowly, even time. It's the kind of environment where your brain naturally slips into that dreamy, relaxed state. Perfect for building memory palaces, and also perfect for falling asleep accidentally, which monks definitely did, even if they didn't admit it. Some monasteries even trained memory through chanting, repeating lines over and over, not fast, not forceful, just slow, soft rhythm, almost musical. The rhythm made the words sink in deeper, almost like rocking your mind gently. Imagine a group of monks chanting inside a stone hall, low voices, echoing a little, the sound rising and falling like waves. The steady repetition makes the words settle into your memory, almost without effort. It's calming, and if your eyes get heavy just thinking about it, that's exactly the vibe. And slowly, very slowly, the monks became walking libraries. They carried entire books inside their minds. They could recall chapters, paragraphs, sentences, sometimes even the exact position of words on a page. And here you are, lying down, listening to their story, drifting a little, imagining that quiet world where time slows down and thoughts move like soft candlelight stretching across stones. And the deeper you go into this world of monastic memory, the more you realize that monks weren't just memorizing words, they were memorizing whole experiences. They treated ideas the way gardeners treat seeds. You place one here, one there, you water them with attention, and slowly they grow into a whole mental landscape. It didn't matter that outside the monastery the world might be noisy or chaotic. Inside their minds, everything followed the quiet order they created. And maybe that's why these techniques survived so long. Because in a world without phones or distractions, the mind itself became the main place to travel. Imagine a monk who has been in the monastery for 20 years. His memory palace isn't just a little hallway or a small courtyard anymore. It's probably huge. Maybe he's built a grand library in his mind, filled with imaginary books. Or a long cloistered walkway where every column holds a different idea. Or maybe he constructed something completely wild, like a giant spiral staircase where each step is a chapter of a book. He probably didn't tell anyone what his palace looked like, because memory palaces were private, personal, like dreams you didn't share unless someone really needed to know. Some monks described their memory palaces in ways that sound almost poetic. They talked about walking through chambers of light, or gardens filled with symbolic plants, or paths that wound through mountains or deserts. All imaginary, but all useful, because every new space created more room for knowledge, more storage for ideas. And remembering became a kind of gentle journey, almost meditative, where the mind wandered intentionally instead of randomly. Now, if you lived in the Middle Ages and you saw a monk sitting very still, eyes half closed, you might think he was asleep, and maybe sometimes he was, but often he was traveling through his mind, moving from one mental room to another. Maybe he paused in front of an imaginary statue that reminded him of a story. Maybe he looked at a mental painting that helped him recall a certain passage. The monks learned to fill their palaces with colorful images because color sticks to memory, and sound sticks, and movement sticks. So their mental worlds were often lively places, even though the real world around them was quiet. The funny thing is, monks liked using strange or shocking images to help with memory. Not disrespectful ones, but simply unusual enough to stay memorable. So if a monk needed to remember a quote about humility, he might imagine a huge, towering man trying to squeeze through a tiny door. If he needed to recall a lesson about patience, maybe he'd imagine a turtle wearing a monk's robe, crawling slowly across a stone floor. These images were never random, they carried meaning. They were like little mental cartoons designed to make serious lessons easier to remember. And this wasn't just for learning scripture. Some monks were responsible for teaching younger students, and they used the same techniques to store lessons on grammar, astronomy, medicine, logic, everything. So imagine a classroom in a monastery, just a simple room with wooden benches, and maybe a small window. A teacher stands there, calmly explaining something complicated, but in his mind he's referring to a giant invisible palace filled with memory cues. Meanwhile, the students are learning to build their own. It must have been pretty amazing, in a quiet sort of way. If you focus, you can almost feel the atmosphere of that classroom, the cool air, the faint smell of ink, the slow, steady voice of the teacher explaining how to visualize a concept. Maybe he says something like, "Imagine a path," and the students nod. "Now place an image there," and they nod again, even if their mental images are wildly different. Each student creating their own universe, each universe storing more and more ideas. This memory training didn't happen instantly. It was a long, slow journey, just like everything else in monastic life. Learning to build a memory palace was like learning to paint or sculpt. You start clumsily, with simple shapes, a hallway, a room, a little shelf. Then you add details, a window, a table, a staircase, and before you know it, you've built something with structure, something stable, something your mind can return to any time, even at night, lying in bed in a cold little cell, with just one candle burning low. And speaking of those cells, they were tiny, a small wooden bed, a table, maybe a cross on the wall. Nothing fancy, but the cool thing is that while monks lived in plain rooms, their minds lived in palaces. It's such a soothing contrast. Simplicity on the outside, richness on the inside. The quiet stone cell became the doorway into whole worlds of thought. Imagine a monk lying down on his narrow bed at night, listening to the soft wind outside, maybe hearing distant footsteps from the night porter walking the halls. The candle flickers lower and lower, the shadows stretch across the walls, and he closes his eyes. He breathes slowly, calmly, and in his mind, he enters the first room of his memory palace. Maybe a large hall with a high ceiling, maybe a sunny courtyard. He walks through it step by step, reviewing the memories he placed there earlier. Nothing rushed, just slow, relaxed recall, like walking through a familiar place you love. And as he finishes the walk, he drifts into sleep, his mind peaceful, his memory refreshed, the room quiet, except for the soft hum of night. It's easy to imagine how comforting this must have been, a routine, a ritual, a gentle closing of the day. And the more monks used these techniques, the more they realized that memory wasn't just something that happened to you. It was something you could shape, build, strengthen, like a muscle, or a garden, or a soft glowing hallway inside your mind. And every day, with every new piece of knowledge, their inner world grew more detailed. And as we move deeper into this gentle world of monastic memory, you start to notice something interesting about how monks used imagination. They didn't treat imagination as childish or silly. For them, imagination was a tool, almost like a lantern they carried inside their minds. A lantern they used to light up ideas so they wouldn't vanish into the dark corners of forgetfulness. In a world where books were rare and every bit of knowledge mattered, imagination became this quiet, trusted friend, a steady glow you could rely on. And monks learned early on that the mind remembers meaning more than plain information. So they wrapped information in little stories, even tiny, simple stories. If they needed to remember a moral lesson, they imagined a character acting it out. If they needed to hold onto a list of ideas, they gave each idea a personality. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just soft little scenes happening inside their memory palace. Maybe a small group of symbolic figures sitting in a courtyard. Maybe a bird perched on a window ledge holding a letter. Maybe a candle flickering next to a phrase they needed to recall. Everything became part of a story, because stories cling to the mind like warm blankets cling to cold nights. Take something like virtue. If a monk needed to remember the virtues patience, humility, charity, he might imagine 3 figures sitting quietly at a long wooden table, one moving slowly like patience, one bowing gently like humility, one offering bread from a basket like charity. Simple, peaceful, memorable. And every time the monk walked into that mental room, the figures would still be there, waiting, like quiet guardians of memory. And monks understood that emotion helped too. Not big, overwhelming emotion, just gentle feelings, warmth, calmness, a sense of importance. So if an idea mattered deeply, they placed it in a special part of their memory palace. Maybe a room with warm light, maybe a window overlooking an imaginary garden, maybe a corridor with soft golden patterns. The brain remembers places tied to feelings, and monks used that like experts. You can almost picture one now, sitting at a small desk, eyes half open, letting a new mental image settle, not drawing it, not writing it, just forming it slowly, like mist, shaping into something recognizable. He lets the idea float in the air of his imagination, then gently places it somewhere inside his mental palace, where it fits. And once it's placed, it stays. Not perfectly, not always completely clear, but clear enough to return to whenever he needs it. And this wasn't just for religious purposes. Some monks recorded local histories, others kept track of medicinal plants, others studied astronomy and seasons, and their memory palaces stored all of that. Imagine remembering the properties of herbs by imagining a little garden inside your mind where each herb grows in a symbolic shape. Or remembering the phases of the moon by picturing a round stone room with moonlight moving across the floor. Monks turned knowledge into scenery, into objects, into gentle little metaphors, and the brain loved it. Walking through a monastery, you'd see them practicing this all the time without even realizing it. A young monk might pause in a hallway, staring at nothing, because he's thinking through a new memory path. An older monk might quietly whisper a phrase to himself as he attaches it to a mental image. Sometimes, a monk would walk slowly around the cloister garden, reciting something under his breath, each step marking another point on his mental journey. To someone outside, it looked like wandering, but inside, it was building. And there's something so relaxing about that. A kind of gentle discipline, like deep breathing for the mind. The same feeling you get when you watch candlelight flicker slowly, or when you listen to soft rain tapping against old stone. Everything in the monastery encouraged slow thinking. Deep thinking, the kind of thinking that connects ideas to places and shapes and stories until everything fits together like puzzle pieces. Now, one of the most fascinating parts of this whole memory universe is how consistent the monks were. They didn't rush, they didn't force the mind to work faster. They believed that slow memory was strong memory, that knowledge planted gently would grow roots. They sometimes spent weeks building one section of a memory palace, weeks deciding what image would represent a single idea. Imagine that, taking your time to choose the perfect symbol, the perfect room, the perfect spot for a thought. It sounds almost luxurious now, in a world where we try to remember things instantly and forget them just as fast. But monks didn't mind time. Time, to them, was like a long, calm river. You can't rush it. You just walk along the edge, steady and unhurried. And memory followed that rhythm. Slowly, gently, patiently. Picture evening falling over the monastery. The sky turning soft shades of blue and purple, the wind settling, the last bell ringing for the night. Monks walking silently back to their rooms, their sandals making soft little sounds against the stone floor, each monk carrying not objects, but knowledge, inside their minds, pages and pages of words, whole lectures, lists, stories, lessons, all tucked away inside their palaces, safe and warm like small lamps glowing behind closed doors. And when they reached their cells, they didn't scramble to recall things before they forgot. They trusted the system. They trusted the images. They trusted the journey. Maybe they sat on their narrow beds for a moment, eyes closed, mentally walking through their palace one more time. Maybe they moved through a hallway, glanced at an imaginary painting, nodded to a symbolic figure in a corner, then let the palace fade as sleep slowly pulled them under. Knowledge drifting like soft dust in their minds, candles burning low. The quiet heartbeat of the monastery settling into its nighttime rhythm. And as the monastery settles deeper into night, you can almost feel how memory itself becomes part of the rhythm of their days. Not something separate, not something stressful, just woven gently into everything they did. Repetition became like a soft heartbeat in their routines. Not harsh repetition, not drilling or forcing, just steady, calm, rhythmic revisiting of ideas until the mind absorbed them naturally, almost without noticing. Imagine the sound of monks chanting together in a dim stone hall. Their voices low and slow, like a warm hum that fills the air. The rhythm of their chant wasn't just for prayer, it was also a memory tool. The monks knew that rhythm stabilizes thought. When words fall into a pattern, the mind catches them like hands catching falling grains of wheat. You don't have to try, you just follow the sound, and the sound carries the meaning. So picture it, a long hall, candles flickering along the walls, a faint scent of beeswax and old stone. The monks stand in 2 rows facing each other, their voices rising and sinking like small waves. The same line repeated softly, then the next, then the next. Over time, these words settled deep inside them, not rushed, not forced, just absorbed through the quiet discipline of rhythm. And even outside of chanting, rhythm shaped their memory. The regular tapping of a monk walking the cloister path at the same time every day, the repetition of turning parchment pages, the soft brushing of sleeves as monks crossed their arms in the same gesture during prayer, all tiny cues, all signals that the day had predictable steps. And where there is predictability, memory grows easily. The mind loves patterns. The monks lived inside patterns. Some monks developed little personal rhythms to help with memorization. Maybe they gently tapped a finger on their desk while recalling a passage. Maybe they rocked slightly back and forth while walking mentally through their memory palace. Maybe they whispered a few key sounds just to anchor the image. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would even notice. Just those tiny, comforting movements people make when their thoughts need to settle. You can imagine one now, in the Scriptorium, sitting near an open window that lets in dusty afternoon light. He holds a piece of parchment gently, reads a line, then pauses. His hand moves slightly, maybe a tap of the quill, maybe the smallest nod, and he glances into the distance as he attaches the line to a mental image. Then he breathes out, calm, steady, and returns to his work, over and over, like waves brushing against a shore. And then there was architecture, the physical monastery itself becoming part of the memory process. Monks didn't just live in these buildings, they used them as templates. The shape of the cloister inspired the shape of a mental courtyard. The angle of a staircase helped form the angle of a symbolic memory path. The layout of the church nave, transept, choir, became a model for organizing their ideas. The real world and the inner world blended until the line between them grew soft. Some monks wrote about how the stones of the monastery taught them to organize their minds. A stone archway became the idea of transition. A window became openness. A dark hallway became contemplation. These weren't metaphors to them, they were memory scaffolds. If a monk needed to remember something difficult, he might mentally place it under an imaginary stone archway inside his palace, because archways symbolized things that connected one idea to the next. Everything had purpose. Everything had meaning. Think of a monk slowly walking down one of those long, echoing corridors at dusk. His sandals make that soft, dry sound that only old stone floors can produce. The light is faint but warm, catching the edges of pillars and walls. He doesn't hurry. He never hurries. He lets the long line of arches guide his thoughts, each arch becoming a chapter, each step a quiet reminder. The corridor becomes a path of recall. And when he reaches the end, he's walked through an entire mental library. Even sound played a role beyond chanting. Small sounds, gentle sounds, the steady dripping of water from a fountain in the cloister garden, the soft breeze brushing through herbs in the monastery beds, the distant rustle of parchment in the Scriptorium. These sounds created a kind of background stillness that helped the mind focus, not in a sharp way, but in that dreamy, drifting way that feels almost like floating. The kind of focus you get when the world is quiet enough that your thoughts slow down and arrange themselves naturally. Imagine sitting beside that cloister fountain now. The stone is cool beneath you. The water falls softly, steady and calming. A few herb leaves shift lightly in the breeze, mint, rosemary, maybe chamomile growing in neat rows. The garden smells faintly sweet, faintly green, just enough to make you breathe deeper. And a monk sits nearby, eyes closed, repeating a phrase softly to himself. Then he goes silent, letting the phrase settle. The water keeps dripping. The breeze keeps whispering. Everything around him is helping him remember without trying. And the most beautiful part of this entire system was how gentle it was. The monks didn't wrestle with their minds. They didn't fight to remember. They allowed memory to grow quietly inside them like vines climbing a wall. Slow but steady. They understood something we often forget. The mind is shaped best by softness, not force. All of it, rhythm, architecture, silence, imagination worked together like threads of a tapestry. A soft, ancient, peaceful tapestry woven inside the mind of anyone who walked the monastery halls long enough. And so, as the soft torchlight flickered along the stone walls, Brother Alred found himself slipping into that familiar rhythm of the night, where the world outside the monastery fell away, and only the quiet hum of memory remained. Because here's the thing most people don't realize. For medieval monks, remembering wasn't just a skill, it was a spiritual exercise, almost like a form of prayer. So let's settle back into that calm, sleepy rhythm as we keep drifting deeper into their strange, impressive, and honestly kind of wholesome world of remembering everything without ever writing most of it down. Imagine Alred sitting at his wooden desk, the kind that always creaked, even though nobody ever dared fix it. And he's got this enormous book open in front of him. Except he isn't reading it. He's studying the page layout, the colors, the shapes, because these things will turn into memory anchors later. Medieval monks treated pages the same way we treat treasure maps. A gold letter here, a tiny doodle there, a margin shaped just a bit differently. Everything had meaning. Everything was a hook. Everything was part of a mental filing cabinet. And remember how we talked about the memory palace? Well, in the monastery, that wasn't just a metaphor. It was real. The long halls of the dormitory, the cold, echoing steps, the alcoves where statues stood, every single space was a mental drawer. They walked through these places daily, so their brains naturally tied information to the environment. Like, oh yes, this psalm goes with the crack in the wall that looks like a fish. Or, the rule about silence. Ah yes, that lives near the staircase that always tries to kill me when my sandals slip. There's something beautifully human about that. They weren't trying to force memory. They were weaving it into their environment, like they were stitching a tapestry of thoughts. Even when they weren't actively memorizing, their brains were still quietly doing the work, filing away bits of scripture and philosophy every time they passed through a doorway or brushed past a cold stone pillar. Now, Alred's favorite part of the technique, and honestly the funniest, was called divine visualization. This is where monks imagined biblical scenes, but not as distant, holy, untouchable things. Nope, they imagined them practically standing in front of them, like memory characters. If Alred needed to remember a specific passage, he might imagine Moses sitting on a stool, tapping his foot impatiently, or David tuning a harp way out of tune. The more vivid, strange, or funny, the better, because memory loves weirdness. Some monasteries even taught young novices to imagine entire conversations with saints. Not real conversations, obviously, more like symbolic ones. If you forgot what came next in a text, you would imagine the saint raising an eyebrow like, seriously, you forgot again, and pop, the next line would come back into your mind. The medieval brain was basically doing cartoon-level mnemonic tricks centuries before modern psychology invented them. And this was all happening in silence, too, which somehow made it even more dramatic. Picture a hall full of monks, all completely quiet, all staring into space, but mentally they're running around inside these bustling Colorful memory palaces full of props and characters that would probably get them side-eyed by the abbot if they ever described them out loud. It's like the world's calmest, slowest, most polite mental theme park. But why go through all this? Why store so much information that your brain basically becomes a medieval library? Because in those days, books were not just expensive, they were sacred. One book could take years to write. Years. If you were lucky, the monastery maybe owned a few dozen. And if you lost a book, if a fire or a flood destroyed it, that was it. Gone forever. Unless someone had memorized it. So the monk who carried entire volumes in his head was just impressive. He was practically a walking backup drive. Monasteries depended on these memory masters to keep knowledge alive, and Alred, well, he took that role seriously, sometimes too seriously. There was this one moment, preserved in a tiny note from another monk, when Alred got so engrossed in mentally rehearsing an entire sermon that he accidentally walked into the laundry area and startled Brother Thomas, who dropped an entire sheet into the wash barrel. According to the note, Alred apologized, then immediately muttered the next line of the sermon under his breath as if nothing happened. Absolute dedication. Still, the best part of all of this wasn't the discipline or the genius-level memorization. It was the peace. The monks genuinely believed that training your memory made you calmer, more centered, more aware, that recalling something slowly, carefully, almost reverently, was like bringing order to your own mind. A peaceful mind could remember better, and a good memory made the world feel less chaotic. So when Alred returned to his cell at night, the candles flickering low, he didn't just sleep, he let his mind wander down the halls of his memory palace, gently checking each doorway, each corner, each figure he had placed there earlier. He drifted through thoughts the way other people walk through dreams. And eventually, as his breathing settled into the slow rhythm of sleep, all those words and images folded neatly into the quiet dot. And so as the candles burned low in the monastery, and the faint chill of the stone walls pressed gently against the night air, Brother Alred settled into his favorite routine. Not reading, not writing, not even chanting, just walking, slowly, through the corridors of his memory palace, carefully inspecting each mental chamber he had built over decades. You see, for monks, the mind itself became a sacred space, more treasured than any physical manuscript. Every nook, every archway, every corner of their imagined world held knowledge carefully arranged, stored, and protected as though it were gold or holy water. Imagine him now, standing at the entrance of a vast mental hall, each column decorated not with stone, but with tiny symbols representing verses he had memorized months or even years ago. A soft breeze flows through his palace, carrying imagined scents of parchment, beeswax, and ink, because memory, as monks discovered, was not just about words, it was about the senses. Touch, sight, even smell helped anchor information in the brain. If he imagined the warm flicker of a candle beside a scroll, the next time he recalled it, the flame would help him bring the words to mind. And somehow, imagining these details made the memory feel alive, almost tangible. The first step in building a memory palace was always choosing a starting point, something concrete from reality. Most monks started with the monastery itself, the garden path, the cloister, the library with its heavy oak desks, the refectory, the bell tower, the dormitories. All of it became scaffolding for their imagination. And the genius of it is that these were spaces they knew intimately, so placing abstract ideas within them became natural. One might store the 10 Commandments along the steps of the bell tower, another might place a medical herb diagram beside a fountain in the cloister, and suddenly the abstract became tangible. Memory was not a list to be forced, but a world to be explored. Alred loved to expand his palace at night, when the real monastery was quiet. He would imagine doors opening into new wings, corridors stretching endlessly, and alcoves filled with little statues or paintings that represented ideas. Each new detail made the palace more vivid and easier to navigate. And because he could imagine it freely, he often added playful touches. Maybe a tiny dragon curled around a particular manuscript as a guard. Maybe a cat sat patiently on a windowsill, reminding him of patience and attentiveness. These small touches, though whimsical, strengthened memory by creating emotional hooks. The brain remembers unusual, even slightly absurd details far better than plain text. But memory palaces weren't built in isolation. They were tied to routines. Every day, monks moved through physical space, and simultaneously, their minds wandered through mental space. Alred might wake in his cell, pull on his wool robe, and imagine walking down the monastery hallway while brushing his teeth or washing his hands. Each step in reality mirrored a step in memory. By linking imagination to action, recall became effortless. Every door, every window, every candle he passed in reality could trigger an associated thought or passage stored in his mind. Chanting also played a central role in strengthening memory. Many passages of scripture were learned by singing or reciting rhythmically. The repetition, soft melody, and slow tempo made the text easier to store. Imagine a monk softly intoning a psalm late in the evening, the flicker of candlelight dancing across the walls. Each phrase falls into the mind naturally, and if forgotten, the rhythm pulls it back. The sound itself becomes a mnemonic device, and sometimes monks would combine rhythm with visualization. A psalm could correspond to a procession in the memory palace, each stanza walking past a different symbolic figure or image, almost like a parade of ideas. Interestingly, the monks' methods also incorporated spatial relationships. If an idea needed to be prioritized, it was placed in the central hall or closest to the imaginary entrance. Less critical ideas were tucked into smaller side rooms. By thinking in terms of spatial hierarchy, they could mentally walk to the most important knowledge first. And the trick was subtle. The palace didn't have to look perfectly realistic. It only had to be navigable in the mind. It could bend, twist, even float in dreamlike ways, as long as the logical connections between objects, ideas, and spaces remained clear. Alred often marveled at how the mind responded. Once a concept was anchored visually, auditorily, emotionally, and spatially, it became almost permanent. And the beauty was that these palaces weren't rigid. They could be expanded, reorganized, and repurposed over time. A corridor that originally held a simple set of instructions could, months later, hold a lecture, an astronomical chart, or even a complex herbal remedy. Flexibility was key. Monks weren't memorizing static lists. They were nurturing living landscapes of knowledge that grew with them. The process of repetition was deliberate. Unlike modern cramming, monks revisited their palaces slowly. At night, before sleep, or early in the morning, they would mentally retrace paths, pausing to inspect each item carefully. Some would imagine subtle movements of objects, a scroll unfurling, a candle flickering, a figure bowing, because subtle animation cemented the memory. The goal was not speed, but depth. Monks understood that shallow recall was fragile. Deeply embedded memories, revisited with care and calm, lasted decades. And imagination wasn't limited to abstract symbols. Real events, histories, and stories were incorporated too. Battles, saintly lives, harvests, local legends, everything became part of the tapestry. A monk learning geography might place rivers, mountains, and towns along a hallway lined with windows representing different regions. A historical account might be stored in a spiraling tower, with each floor corresponding to a year or reign. By externalizing complexity into spatial, visual, and sometimes even tactile analogues, the monks' minds became vast living maps of knowledge. Emotion played a quiet but powerful role. Concepts tied to moral lessons, awe or wonder, were more easily remembered. A miracle in a saint's life might be anchored to a glowing figure in a cathedral window. A tragic event might rest under the shadow of a heavy archway. By linking knowledge to feeling, the monks ensured that memory was not merely mechanical, but deeply integrated with the soul, making the act of recall both accurate and meaningful. And then there was teaching. Older monks like Alred were responsible for novices who learned by observing, imitating, and gradually building their own memory palaces. Sometimes this involved walking silently alongside a senior monk as he recited a passage, each novice following the invisible path in his own mind. Other times, novices were guided to create their own spaces. Place humility by the fountain, a teacher might suggest, or let patience rest beside the bell tower. Slowly, step by step, a student constructed an inner world that mirrored the discipline and creativity of the teacher. All of this happened in near silence. A monastery in the evening was a symphony of stillness, footsteps echoing gently against stone, the soft hum of distant chants, the whisper of wind through the garden, the faint rustle of parchment. And within that calm, the mind could expand freely. Memory palaces flourished where noise and distraction were absent. The monks were gardeners of thought, tending each branch, leaf, and root with care. letting it grow without interference. Alred sometimes described this experience as meditative. You could lie in bed after a long day, eyes closed, and simply wander through your palace. No urgency, no pressure, just a slow walk, inspecting, adjusting, recalling, and gradually, the mind became a sanctuary. Knowledge was stored safely. Ideas became familiar friends. And, ultimately, the palace was a reflection of self-discipline, devotion, and calm. And so the night deepened. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere, a bell tolled softly, marking the passage of time. But inside the palace, time seemed to stretch and bend. Alred moved gently from room to room, watching his mental images settle and glow in candlelight of imagination. And eventually, as sleep began to take him, the palace remained, silently holding all that he had learned, ready to awaken again in the morning with the same gentle precision. And that's the quiet, powerful secret of the monk's memory technique. Not rushed, not frantic, not competitive, just slow, deliberate, beautiful mental architecture, built over years, nurtured daily, and intertwined with rhythm, emotion, imagination, and devotion. And in this soft, structured, luminous world, knowledge wasn't lost. It was alive, waiting patiently for anyone who walked its corridors, ready to be recalled like a familiar path on a calm, moonlit night. And as dawn crept slowly over the monastery, spilling pale light across the cold stone floors, the world outside was waking in fits and starts. But inside, Alred and his fellow monks were already moving in quiet, deliberate rhythm. The early morning air was crisp, filled with the faint smell of dew and herbs, and the soft clatter of sandals on stone reminded the monks that the day's work had begun. Yet before touching quills, parchment, or books, many monks like Alred began the day with a quiet walk through their mental palaces, revisiting every corridor, hall, and alcove they had built over years of careful practice. Picture it, the cloister, damp with morning moisture, cloaked in mist. Alred walks slowly, sandals making gentle taps that echo faintly in the empty hallways. But in his mind, he is on another journey entirely. The real and the imagined intertwine. He steps past an arched doorway in the monastery, and simultaneously his mind passes the first room of his memory palace, a sunlit chamber where rows of glowing letters float above small tables. Every letter corresponds to a passage he needs to remember. The physical world moves slowly, the mind moves freely, and the combination forms an almost hypnotic rhythm that reinforces memory naturally. The day's first prayers arrive, soft chanting filling the empty spaces of the stone halls. Low and steady, voices interweaving, the sound is more than ritual, it is a living mnemonic. Each phrase sung carries not only spiritual weight, but cognitive reinforcement. The repetition anchors passages in the mind, the melody and rhythm forming an invisible scaffolding upon which knowledge can rest. Alred's lips move slightly, softly echoing the words. He doesn't rush, doesn't force. His body is present, but his mind wanders through a separate, yet parallel, universe. In this quiet symphony, sensory details become allies. Candlelight flickers over carefully lined desks, parchment smells faintly of resin and ink, and the chill of the stone reminds the monk that every sensation can become a trigger. Monks notice these things consciously, knowing that when a smell, a sound, or a visual cue is linked with an idea, recall is strengthened. A particular archway, a narrow spiral staircase, a specific window framing morning light, could act as anchors for a mental image, and those images could contain knowledge as easily as a manuscript might. Alred moves into the library, where massive wooden shelves rise like silent sentinels. Some books are stacked horizontally, others upright, each carefully guarded. In the real world, the shelves hold fragile pages of ink. In his mind, the same shelves exist as a mental grid, each slot a repository of information. He walks past them, and with every step, he recalls passages he memorized the day before, even decades ago. Names, dates, prayers, medicinal recipes, astronomical charts all live in these silent, imagined spaces, ready for retrieval. Even mundane actions are woven into this mnemonic practice. Pouring water for the garden becomes a chance to review a sequence of steps in a surgical procedure. Folding a robe might prompt recall of a philosophical argument. Preparing herbs in the Scriptorium's garden aligns with recalling the healing properties and symbolic meanings of plants. Every gesture becomes part of a larger memory choreography, and the mind, moving naturally, reinforces patterns. Knowledge is not a static object to be stored. It is a living process, unfolding through daily life. Alred often paused in a corner of the garden cloister, watching the soft sway of herbs in the morning breeze. Here, he integrated sensory imagery into his memory palace. A sprig of rosemary might represent steadfastness. Mint might mark clarity of thought. The gentle shimmer of sunlight on the leaves became a cue for recalling a psalm. The natural world became a supplement to the imagined, bridging reality and imagination seamlessly. Monks learned to link their environment with abstract ideas, reinforcing memory while maintaining a deep connection to their. At mid-morning, the Scriptorium fills softly with light. Monks settle at their desks, quills poised above fresh parchment. Copying a manuscript is not just transcription, it is reinforcement. Each letter drawn, each word written, echoes the mental palace. Alred's mind imagines the letters floating in a glowing chamber, each sentence unfolding along a corridor he has built over years. The act of writing becomes a physical rehearsal of memory, every stroke of the quill reinforcing the inner structure of knowledge. Even humor plays a subtle role in memory. Some images are deliberately absurd, a tiny angel balancing on the edge of a candle, or a cat guarding a manuscript. The brain is attuned to novelty and unexpectedness, and these small touches ensure that passages remain vivid. Alred smiled slightly as he imagined a small dragon perched atop a bookshelf, wagging its tail while a line from scripture floated beneath it. The mental picture, odd as it is, ensured that the knowledge anchored deeply into memory. Training did not stop at individual memory. Monks taught novices through guided visualization. A master might say, "Place virtue beside the fountain," or "Let wisdom sit on the window ledge." Each novice constructs an internal space parallel to the master's, allowing for personal adaptation while reinforcing universal principles. This creates a layered learning system. Knowledge is both shared and private, allowing for growth while maintaining personal mental structure. During the late morning, Alred might visit the infirmary, where herbal remedies were prepared. Here, memory techniques intersected with practical knowledge. Herbs were not only stored in physical jars, but also in spatialized mental gardens. Sage, thyme, chamomile, and rosemary were placed along a path in the memory palace, each linked to its medicinal use. As he walked the corridors of the monastery, he simultaneously walked through his mental garden, ensuring that knowledge of healing remained vivid and accessible. Even architectural features of the monastery contributed to the process. Staircases, arches, and windows were not just functional, they became symbolic anchors. A narrow spiral staircase might hold sequences of events. A high arched window could contain theological concepts. A small alcove might anchor a forgotten hymn. By embedding knowledge into the built environment, monks ensured that memory was not abstract but lived and tangible, accessible through deliberate mental navigation. Lunch is quiet, eaten in the refectory with minimal conversation. Monks sit on wooden benches, each bite measured, each movement deliberate. Even meals become opportunities for mental rehearsal. Alred traces invisible corridors in his mind while breaking bread. The rhythmic eating, the silence, the physicality of the meal all serve as mnemonic support. Every daily activity, no matter how ordinary, becomes a potential path in the memory palace. And then comes meditation. Before rest, monks like Alred close their eyes and walk slowly through their palaces. Each step, each chamber, each figure is inspected. Doors are opened, corners checked, floating letters reviewed. It is gentle, patient work. Knowledge is not forced. It is coaxed, nurtured, and allowed to settle. The mind, quiet and focused, becomes a landscape of meaning, a sanctuary of thought. By the evening, candles burn low. Shadows stretch across walls and floors. The monastery is still. Outside, the wind whispers, the bell tolls faintly, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sings softly. Inside, Alred lies down, closing his eyes, and begins the final nightly walk through his mental palace. Each path, each chamber, each symbolic figure glows faintly in his imagination. Passages of scripture, names, dates, medicinal recipes, and moral lessons drift softly, like leaves carried by a slow current. And eventually, sleep embraces him, the memory palace, still alive, still luminous, ready for another day. And this is how monks like Alred preserved centuries of knowledge, slowly, patiently, deliberately. Memory was not a burden but a garden, not a list but a landscape. not a task but a meditation. And in the quiet rhythm of monastic life, knowledge thrived, safe in the minds of those devoted to both spirit and intellect. And as night falls once again over the monastery, a gentle hush settles across the stone halls. Outside, the wind rustles softly through the trees, and somewhere distant, an owl calls once, twice, then silence. Inside, Alred sits at his small desk, quill resting idle, eyes half closed. He's not writing, not reading, not reciting. He is traveling again, slowly, deliberately, through the halls of his mental palace, the inner universe he has been shaping for decades. Each corridor, each room, each imagined figure holds knowledge carefully organized, awaiting recall. It is a quiet and comforting work, one that requires patience more than speed, and calm more than force. Imagine now the chambers of this memory palace. They are vast and intricate, more expansive than the monastery itself. There are rooms that glow with soft golden light, where letters and symbols float gently in mid-air, illuminated like tiny lanterns. There are courtyards with imaginary gardens, each plant a carefully chosen mnemonic for a passage, a virtue, a historical event, or a practical lesson. Some chambers are adorned with statues or small figures, each performing subtle gestures that hint at moral lessons or theological concepts. These chambers are neither chaotic nor rigid. They are alive, structured, and soothing, a private universe built from intention and imagination. And as Alred moves through these rooms, he recalls not just words, but experiences. The monastery, in reality, teaches rhythm, patience, and repetition. His daily life walking along cloister paths, tending herbs, copying manuscripts, or listening to bells tollers, mirrored in his mind as journeys through the memory palace. A physical step is mirrored by a mental step. A turned page corresponds to a visualized scroll unfurling in an imagined hall. Every motion, every action, every sensory detail becomes a scaffold for thought. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. The mundane becomes memorable. Even the smallest, most playful images serve a purpose. Perhaps a tiny angel perches on a candle, pointing to a floating letter. Perhaps a small cat curls around a manuscript as a reminder of vigilance and care. Perhaps a dragon guards a doorway, reminding the monk of the challenge of virtue. Odd as they are, these images are powerful mnemonic devices. The brain favors vivid, emotional, or unusual cues, and the monks intuitively exploited this principle centuries before psychology named it. Humor, whimsy, and surprise all help to solidify memory. Now imagine Alred preparing to teach a novice. He gestures toward a section of his mental palace, saying softly, "Place humility by the fountain. Let patience rest under the archway." The novice closes his eyes, visualizing a parallel palace, mirroring the senior monk's layout but personalizing it to his own mind. Knowledge becomes a shared journey and a private discovery simultaneously. Over weeks and months, corridors are built, rooms decorated, figures positioned. The palace grows, evolves, and deepens, shaping not only memory but also focus, discipline, and creativity. Even sensory experiences anchor memory. The faint scent of beeswax, the sound of sandals against stone, the glow of morning light through the windows, each detail becomes a cue, a subtle hook for retrieval. If Alred wants to recall a passage of scripture or a historical date, he can close his eyes and picture the same corner of the cloister where he first visualized it, feel the cool stone underfoot, hear the faint rustle of leaves, and the memory comes back as naturally as breathing. The environment becomes inseparable from knowledge. And it's not just religious texts or moral lessons. Practical knowledge finds its way into the memory palace as well. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, mathematical sequences, architectural proportions, local histories all are integrated into the imagined corridors and chambers. Alred can walk through a hall and mentally pick up a recipe for a poultice, then move to another room and recall the precise phases of the moon for planting crops. The mind becomes a comprehensive library, vast, flexible, and astonishingly reliable. What is remarkable is how deliberate, yet gentle the process is. There is no force, no frantic effort, no stress. Monks like Alred understand that memory thrives in calm, slow, and repeated practice. A single evening might involve gently revisiting a chamber, inspecting floating letters, adjusting symbolic figures, letting them settle into place. The goal is depth, not speed. Knowledge, once planted, must grow slowly, taking root across multiple sensory and emotional pathways. And the physical monastery supports this practice. The architecture itself becomes mnemonic. Narrow spiral staircases, soaring arches, small alcoves, and high windows are not merely functional. They serve as cues for structuring ideas in the mind. A staircase might represent a chronological sequence. A window, a point of contemplation. An alcove, a space for an abstract principle. Walking through the building, in reality, mirrors walking through the memory palace, reinforcing both. In the quiet of the Scriptorium, monks copy manuscripts with meticulous care. Each stroke of the quill mirrors a movement through the palace. Letters are not merely written. They are visualized, touched, mentally placed. Every line of text is rehearsed in the mind as it is committed to parchment. The act of transcription is itself a method of deep memory reinforcement. Writing and imagining work together in harmony, reinforcing both physical and mental learning. Emotion enhances recall further. Moral lessons, tales of saints, and historical narratives are imbued with feeling. A miraculous event might be visualized as a glowing figure in a courtyard. A tragedy might unfold under a shadowed archway. Linking knowledge to emotion ensures that recall is vivid and meaningful. Memory becomes not a mechanical task, but a lived, immersive experience. Monks also use rhythm outside of chanting. The cadence of footsteps, the gentle rocking while walking through the cloisters, or the soft tapping of fingers on a desk, all create subtle rhythms that reinforce the mind's patterns. Even breathing, slow and deliberate, aligns with mental navigation. Knowledge is embedded in the body as much as the mind. Every gesture, every pause, every movement supports retention. Teaching novices reinforces memory further. In guiding others through visualizations, seniors revisit their own mental palaces, explaining the placement of ideas, the meaning of symbols, and the logic of corridors, strengthens their own recall. Knowledge is rehearsed, refined, and shared, deepening both understanding and retention. It is a system of layered, living memory, where instruction and practice coexist seamlessly. By evening, as candles dim and shadows lengthen, Alred lies in his cell. He closes his eyes and begins the final nightly walk. Every corridor, every chamber, every figure glows faintly in his imagination. Words, images, and lessons drift softly, settling into long-term memory. Sleep arrives gently, carrying him into rest, while the palace remains vigilant, silently holding all that he has learned, ready to awaken with him at dawn. And this, ultimately, is the secret of the monk's extraordinary memory. Not pressure, not repetition alone, not notes or books, but slow, deliberate, sensory-rich imagination, integrated with daily life, anchored in architecture, rhythm, and emotion. Knowledge becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion, a garden that grows steadily over decades. And in the hush of the monastery, in the quiet of the mind, memory thrives. And as the soft glow of candlelight flickers across the stone walls of the monastery, a hush settles over the cloisters. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees, and the occasional crow or distant bell marks the slow passage of time. Inside, Alred sits quietly at his small wooden desk, eyes closed, breathing evenly, tracing mental corridors that have been carefully constructed over decades. This is the true work of a medieval monk, not simply reading or writing, but cultivating memory, shaping it gently into lasting structure, and embedding knowledge into the mind as securely as stone arches hold a roof. Picture the corridors of Alred's memory palace, vast, winding, luminous, yet entirely calm. Hallways stretch like quiet rivers of thought, lined with doors, each door opening to a room filled with carefully visualized ideas. One room might contain theological arguments, each phrase floating above a small table, softly glowing as if lit from within. Another room could be a garden, herbs and flowers, symbolically placed to represent practical knowledge remedies, almanac dates, astronomical charts. Each detail, each symbol, each imagined figure is carefully positioned to maximize recall. The genius of the monk's system lies in the interplay between imagination and routine. Every day, the monks moved through physical spaces, the cloisters, the library, the scriptorium, the dormitory. At the same time, they navigated parallel mental landscapes, reinforcing knowledge with every step. A walk along a garden path might correspond to visiting an imagined garden of herbal remedies. A trip up the spiral staircase could mirror the chronological progression of historical events. The mind, quietly attentive, absorbs information not as isolated facts but as part of a larger, coherent world. Even whimsical or playful images serve a profound purpose. A small angel perches on a candle to mark a key concept. A cat curls around a floating manuscript, reminding the monk to be vigilant. Sometimes a dragon guards a doorway, symbolizing a difficult or challenging passage of scripture. Odd or humorous as these images may seem, they anchor memory through novelty and emotion. The human brain remembers things that are unusual or emotionally resonant far more easily than ordinary, neutral information. The monks exploited this principle intuitively, long before science explained why, and repetition is subtle, woven into rhythm and movement rather than enforced harshly. Chanting, soft and melodic, not only provided spiritual nourishment but also acted as a mnemonic scaffold. Alred might softly intone a psalm, the cadence of the words reinforcing mental images, each syllable marking a step along a corridor in the memory palace. Rhythm aligns with the natural flow of thought, making recall smoother and more reliable. The brain loves pattern, and the monks structured every step, gesture, and sound to take advantage of this innate tendency. Teaching novices further strengthens memory. When a senior monk instructs a younger one, guiding visualization with phrases like, "Place humility by the fountain, let wisdom rest beneath the arch," he reinforces his own memory as he helps construct the novice's palace. Knowledge becomes both shared and private, simultaneously rehearsed and expanded. The act of teaching is an additional layer of repetition, a living reinforcement that deepens retention without force or stress. Sensory details anchor knowledge even further. The cool stone beneath a sandal, the faint smell of ink or beeswax, the shimmer of sunlight on a window, each element can trigger memory, linking real-world sensations to abstract concepts. A particular alcove might anchor a moral lesson. A sculpted archway could hold a theological argument. A flickering candle might signify a line of scripture. The monastery itself becomes a teaching tool, and the physical world and mental palace intertwine seamlessly. Practical knowledge, too, finds its place in the memory palace. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, architectural proportions, local histories, and genealogies are all splicized. Alred might walk through a mental garden where each herb has a place corresponding to its healing properties. Astronomical knowledge might reside along the spiral staircase, each step representing a month or phase of the moon. By externalizing complexity into spatial, visual, and emotional analogues, monks transformed abstract knowledge into tangible mental landscapes. Emotion enhances recall in subtle ways. Passages imbued with moral or spiritual significance are visualized in glowing or inspiring chambers. Tragic events might unfold under shadowed arches, miraculous ones in radiant courtyards. Linking ideas to feeling ensures they are remembered, not just accurately, but meaningfully. Memory becomes a lived experience, not a mechanical task, and the knowledge retained carries resonance as well as utility. Even mundane gestures reinforce memory. The gentle rocking of a monk while walking through the cloisters, the soft tapping of a finger on a desk, the cadence of steps echoing on stone floors. Each movement reinforces rhythm. Each rhythm reinforces thought. Knowledge becomes embodied, internalized, and inseparable from lived experience. Every ordinary act, from folding a robe to pouring water for the garden, becomes a potential mnemonic tool. Architecture itself is a mnemonic aid. Spiral staircases, arches, windows, and alcoves serve as symbolic anchors. A staircase might hold sequences of events, a window might frame a theological idea, an alcove might contain an abstract principle. By linking the imagination to the tangible, monks ensured knowledge was navigable, structured, and retrievable. Walking through the monastery mirrors, walking through the palace, reinforcing memory at every turn. By late evening, the scriptorium is quiet. Candles burn low, casting long shadows. Alred lies on his narrow bed, closing his eyes, mentally traversing every hallway, chamber, and courtyard. Letters, symbols, herbs, figures, and passages float softly in his mind, reviewed gently, allowed to settle. Sleep arrives gradually, carrying the monk into rest, while the palace remains vigilant, preserving knowledge with the calm steadiness of decades-long practice. The monk's method is remarkable not only for its efficacy, but for its serenity. No urgency, no panic, no frantic cramming. Just slow, deliberate, sensory-rich visualization, paired with daily life, rhythm, and gentle repetition. Knowledge becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a quiet companion, and in the hush of the monastery, in the silence of the mind, memory thrives. And so the world of medieval memory techniques reveals its beauty, a combination of imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, and deliberate practice. What seems mystical to us today was practical, meditative, and profoundly human. Alred and his fellow monks didn't just store knowledge, they cultivated it, nourished it, and walked with it through every day, every season, every night, until it became inseparable from their very being. And as night falls once again over the monastery, a gentle stillness blankets the stone walls. The wind whispers softly through the cloisters, and the faint echo of distant bells drifts across the grounds. Inside, Brother Alred sits quietly in his cell, eyes half closed, breathing evenly, tracing the corridors of his mental palace. This palace, built over decades of careful, deliberate practice, is not a simple collection of facts but a living, breathing landscape of knowledge. Each room, corridor, and courtyard is infused with sensory detail, emotion, and rhythm, making it almost tangible, as real as the stone walls surrounding him. Imagine the halls of Alred's memory palace. They stretch far and wide, luminous yet calm. Archways open into sunlit chambers where letters, symbols, and passages float gently above tables or hover in mid-air, softly illuminated as though lit from within. In the garden courtyard, every herb, flower, and tree represents a lesson, a passage, a practical skill. Some rooms are populated with figures enacting moral stories. Others contain floating scrolls or tiny statues symbolizing abstract concepts. Every detail is intentional, chosen to reinforce memory, anchored in rhythm, spatial relationships, and emotion. The brilliance of this system lies in its integration with daily life. The monastery itself provides structure and rhythm. Walking along cloister paths, tending gardens, copying manuscripts, or listening to the bell toll are not merely chores, they are opportunities to reinforce memory. Each physical step is mirrored by a mental step, each action a cue for recall. Alred might walk past a window in reality, while simultaneously reviewing a passage in his mental garden. The ordinary and the imagined intertwine seamlessly, creating a life in which memory flows naturally, without strain or effort. Whimsical imagery enhances this process. Angels, cats, dragons, and tiny figures inhabit the mental spaces, each symbolizing a lesson or concept. The unusual nature of these images captures attention, making memory more durable. A tiny angel perched on a candle reminds Alred of patience. A cat curled around a manuscript signals vigilance. A playful dragon guarding a doorway marks a difficult theological passage. Humor, surprise, and emotional resonance ensure that knowledge remains vivid, easily retrievable, and deeply embedded in the mind. Repetition occurs in subtle, natural ways. Chanting, slow and melodic, reinforces passages of scripture. The cadence of words aligns with mental imagery, helping each phrase settle gently in the mind. Rhythm also manifests in daily motion, the rocking of the body while walking, the tapping of fingers on a desk, the cadence of footsteps echoing on stone floors. These patterns synchronize with thought, supporting memory organically, without pressure or stress. Teaching novices multiplies the benefits. A senior monk guiding a novice through visualization reinforces his own memory while shaping another's. Placed humility by the fountain, he might say, "Let wisdom rest beneath the archway." Each novice constructs a parallel palace, personalizing it, while learning foundational principles. Knowledge becomes both shared and private, simultaneously rehearsed and expanded, and each act of teaching strengthens memory for both teacher and student. Sensory anchoring plays a central role. The cool stone underfoot, the faint smell of ink and beeswax, the shimmer of morning sunlight through windows all serve as subtle cues. A particular alcove may anchor a moral lesson, a window frame, a theological concept, a flickering candle, a line of scripture. The physical monastery mirrors the mental palace, and each interaction with the environment reinforces recall. Knowledge is not abstract. It is inseparable from experience. Practical information finds equal place. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, local histories, architectural principles, genealogies are spatialized within the mental palace. Alred might visualize a garden where each plant represents a treatment, or a spiral staircase where each step corresponds to a month, a reign, or a historical event. Spatial, visual, emotional, and symbolic connections transform abstract data into tangible, navigable mental landscapes. Emotion strengthens retention. Stories of saints, miraculous events, or tragedies are visualized in vivid, memorable ways. Miracles glow in radiant courtyards, tragedies unfold under shadowed arches. Linking knowledge to feeling ensures that it is remembered with depth and meaning, not merely as neutral information. Memory becomes immersive, a lived experience rather than a mechanical process. Even routine movements reinforce the mind. Rocking gently while walking, tapping fingers, pacing corridors. These actions create rhythm, which synchronizes with cognitive patterns. Daily gestures become memory aids. Pouring water, folding robes, tending the garden. Each activity supports mental navigation. Knowledge is internalized and embodied, inseparable from both mind and body. Architecture amplifies the system. Spiral staircases, arches, windows, and alcoves serve as symbolic anchors. Staircases hold sequences of events. Windows frame abstract ideas. Alcoves contain principles or moral lessons. By linking imagination to tangible surroundings, monks ensure memory is navigable, structured, and retrievable. Physical movement and mental navigation reinforce one another. During transcription in the Scriptorium, monks write with meticulous care. Each stroke of the quill corresponds to a step through the memory palace. Letters and words are visualized, mentally arranged, and rehearsed. Writing becomes a rehearsal of memory, each act reinforcing the inner architecture. Transcription and imagination work together, creating a deeply embedded system of retention. Even humor, playfulness, and novelty are deliberate. Angels pointing to letters, cats guarding scrolls, dragons perched on bookshelves. These unusual images draw attention, making recall easier. Monks exploit the brain's love for vivid, emotional, and unexpected stimuli, ensuring knowledge remains memorable. By evening, as candles burn low and shadows lengthen, Alred returns to his cell. He closes his eyes, walking mentally through every hallway, chamber, and courtyard. Passages of scripture, historical events, herbal remedies, and moral lessons drift gently, settling like soft dust. Sleep arrives gradually, carrying him into rest, while the palace remains alive, silently holding knowledge for another day. The beauty of this method is in its gentleness. No urgency, no cramming, no stress. Knowledge is built gradually, patiently, and with care, integrated with rhythm, emotion, sensory experience, and imagination. Memory becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion, and in the quiet, in the stillness, knowledge thrives, enduring across decades, across centuries, held by those devoted to both learning and devotion. And so the monk's secret is revealed, a harmonious system combining imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, sensory cues, and patient repetition. What seems mystical to modern eyes is actually a deeply practical, serene, and profoundly human method of preserving knowledge. Alred and his fellow monks do not merely store information, they cultivate it, walk with it, nurture it, and make it a seamless part of daily life, a luminous inner world ready to awaken whenever needed. And as the monastery settles into the gentle hush of evening, the world outside fading into soft shadows, Alred sits quietly at his desk, eyes half closed, breathing slow and even, tracing the corridors of his mental palace. Over decades, this palace has grown vast, intricate, luminous, and calm, a private universe where knowledge is carefully organized, anchored in imagination, rhythm, in sensory detail. Every archway, corridor, courtyard, and chamber has its purpose, holding passages, moral lessons, practical knowledge, and historical records, in quiet, deliberate order. Imagine him walking through one of the palace's many chambers. The room glows with soft golden light, illuminating floating letters and symbols hovering above tables or along walls. One corner contains a miniature garden, herbs representing medicinal knowledge, rosemary for clarity, sage for healing, chamomile for patience. Another chamber is populated by figures enacting moral lessons, a saint raising a hand, a disciple bowing, a tiny dragon guarding a doorway, representing a challenging theological point. The palace is alive yet calm, structured yet flexible, a perfect environment for memory to grow naturally. The genius of this system is its seamless integration with daily life. Each physical movement through the monastery mirrors a mental step through the palace. A walk along the cloister path corresponds to a stroll through the herbal garden of knowledge. A trip up the spiral staircase parallels moving through a chronological sequence of events. Everyday gestures, from folding robes to pouring water in the garden, become subtle cues reinforcing memory. Knowledge is not learned separately from life, it flows with it, anchored in movement, rhythm, and repetition. Humor and novelty play a quiet but crucial role. Angels perched on candles, cats curled around manuscripts, dragons guarding doorways. These playful images make memory durable. The brain favors unusual, emotionally resonant, or visually striking cues. By weaving whimsy into serious learning, monks ensured that complex ideas were memorable without effort. These imaginative flourishes act as gentle mnemonic anchors, tying abstract knowledge to concrete and emotional images. Repetition is deliberate but gentle. Chanting, slow and melodic, embeds scripture in the mind. The cadence of words aligns with visualized corridors, rooms, and figures, reinforcing memory. The rhythm of physical actions rocking while walking, tapping fingers on a desk, footsteps echoing on stone floors, synchronizes with cognitive patterns, supporting recall naturally. Memory thrives in rhythm, and monks understood this intuitively. Teaching novices reinforces memory further. A senior monk guides a younger one through visualization, saying, "Place humility by the fountain. Let wisdom rest beneath the arch." Each novice builds a personal palace, adapting it to individual imagination, while learning foundational principles. Teaching becomes both rehearsal and expansion. Knowledge is simultaneously shared and internalized. Each instruction strengthens retention, subtly shaping understanding. Sensory anchoring enhances memory. The cool stone beneath sandals, the faint smell of ink and beeswax, the shimmer of morning sunlight teach, cue helps retrieval. A particular window frames a theological concept, an alcove contains a moral lesson, a candle flickers beside a floating letter. The monastery itself becomes a living map of knowledge, where the physical world and mental palace intertwine seamlessly. Knowledge is not abstract, it is experienced. Practical knowledge is also spatialized. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, genealogies, architectural principles, and local histories are all integrated into the palace. Alred might visualize a garden where each plant corresponds to a treatment, or a spiral staircase where each step represents a historical date or astronomical phase. Spatial, visual, emotional, and symbolic links transform abstract knowledge into tangible, navigable landscapes, easy to recall and deeply ingrained. Emotion strengthens retention. Miraculous events shine in radiant courtyards. Tragedies unfold under shadowed arches. Linking knowledge to feeling ensures it is remembered vividly, with depth and meaning. Memory becomes immersive. Learning is no longer mechanical. It is a lived, emotional experience. Knowledge resides not only in the mind, but in the heart. Even mundane gestures reinforce rhythm and memory. Rocking gently while walking, tapping fingers, pacing corridors, these subtle actions create cadence and synchronize with thought patterns. Daily chores, folding robes, preparing meals, tending gardens become part of a larger choreography of learning. Knowledge is internalized and embodied, inseparable from both mind and body. Architecture amplifies learning. Spiral staircases, arches, alcoves, and windows serve as symbolic anchors. Staircases might hold sequences of events. Windows frame abstract ideas. Alcoves contain moral principles. The physical monastery mirrors the palace, reinforcing memory through movement. Walking through reality corresponds to navigating the imagined, creating a living, retrievable structure of knowledge. In the Scriptorium, transcription is itself a mnemonic exercise. Each stroke of the quill is mirrored by mental rehearsal. Letters and words are visualized as floating symbols in the palace, each act of writing reinforcing the inner architecture. Copying manuscripts is not just preservation of texts, it's cultivation of memory, a tactile rehearsal that strengthens recall. Writing, imagining, and feeling work together seamlessly. Humor and playfulness enhance retention. Angels pointing to letters, cats guarding scrolls, dragons perched on shelves. These unusual images make ideas memorable. Novelty and emotional resonance ensure knowledge remains vivid. The whimsical, integrated nature of the palace creates a mental landscape that is both functional and delightful. By evening, candles burn low, shadows lengthen, and Alred lies on his narrow bed. He closes his eyes, walking mentally through every corridor, chamber, and courtyard. Passages of scripture, historical events, herbal remedies, moral lessons drift gently, settling like soft dust. Sleep arrives gradually, carrying him into rest, while the palace remains alive, silently holding knowledge for another day. The monk's method is remarkable for its gentleness and effectiveness. No cramming, no urgency, no stress. Knowledge is nurtured slowly, integrated with rhythm, emotion, sensory experience, and imagination. Memory becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion, and in the quiet, in the stillness, it endures, preserved across decades, centuries, held by those devoted to learning, reflection, and devotion. Ultimately, the monk's secret is simple yet profound. Imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, sensory cues, and patient repetition. Knowledge is not merely stored, it is cultivated, walked with, nurtured, and woven into daily life. Alred's palace glows softly in the quiet night, a luminous world where memory thrives, accessible whenever needed, a serene companion in the quiet rhythm of monastic life. And as another night drapes the monastery in quiet shadows, Alred sits cross-legged on the cold stone floor of his cell, the faint smell of wax and parchment surrounding him. Outside, the wind stirs softly, rustling leaves and carrying faint echoes of distant bells. Inside, the world is still, yet Alred's mind journeys through corridors, courtyards, and chambers of his carefully constructed memory palace. Over decades, he has cultivated this inner universe with patience and care, each corner filled with knowledge, each corridor imbued with meaning, each figure placed with intention. Imagine the palace stretching before him, archways open into sunlit rooms where letters float above tables or hover in mid-air, illuminated gently as though by internal light. In one chamber, a miniature garden represents practical knowledge, rosemary for clarity, chamomile for patience, sage for healing. In another, figures enact moral lessons, saints raising hands in blessing, disciples bowing in humility, tiny dragons guarding doors of challenging passages. The palace is alive yet calm, structured yet flexible, a sanctuary for the mind where learning lives. The brilliance of this method lies in its seamless integration with daily life. Every movement through the monastery mirrors a mental journey. A walk through the cloisters corresponds to a stroll through the palace garden. Climbing a spiral staircase reflects chronological progressions of events or sequences of scripture. Even mundane gestures, pouring water for plants, folding robes, touching quills, reinforce memory. Knowledge is not separate from life, it flows with it, anchored in rhythm, movement, and observation. Humor and novelty enrich memory. Angels perched on candles, cats curled around manuscripts, dragons guarding hallways. These playful elements create memorable cues. The mind naturally favors unusual or emotionally resonant images, and the monks intuitively exploited this principle. These whimsical additions anchor knowledge firmly, making recall effortless and enjoyable. Repetition is gentle, not forced. Chanting, rhythmic and melodic, embeds passages in the mind. The cadence aligns with imagined corridors, rooms, and figures, reinforcing memory without stress. Physical rhythms, rocking while walking, tapping fingers, steps echoing on stone floors, synchronize with thought patterns. Learning thrives in rhythm, and monks leverage this naturally, allowing memory to deepen over time. Teaching novices further strengthens memory. Guiding a young monk through visualization, place humility by the fountain. Let wisdom rest beneath the arch, reinforces the teacher's own knowledge. Each novice builds a personal palace, adapted to imagination while learning foundational principles. Instruction becomes rehearsal and expansion simultaneously. Knowledge is shared, internalized, and refined through this gentle mentorship. Sensory anchoring is crucial. The cool stone underfoot, the faint scent of ink, the shimmer of morning light becomes a cue for recall. A window might frame a moral lesson, an alcove contain a theological argument, a candle flicker beside a floating letter. The physical monastery mirrors the imagined, creating a living map of knowledge that is both tangible and navigable. Practical knowledge finds its place. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, genealogies, architectural measurements, and local histories are spitized. A garden within the palace might hold herbs for treatment. A spiral staircase could mark months, reigns, or historical sequences. spatial, visual, emotional, and symbolic links transform abstract knowledge into tangible, navigable landscapes, ensuring deep, reliable memory. Emotion enhances retention. Miraculous events shine in radiant courtyards. Tragedies unfold under shadowed arches. Linking knowledge to feeling makes recall vivid and meaningful. Memory becomes immersive and alive, a lived experience rather than a mechanical task. Knowledge is felt as well as known. Mundane gestures support rhythm and retention. Rocking gently while walking, tapping fingers, pacing quietly, these subtle actions synchronize with thought patterns. Daily activities, folding robes, tending gardens, preparing meals, reinforce memory passively. Knowledge becomes embodied, inseparable from both mind and body. Architecture itself serves as a mnemonic scaffold. Spiral staircases, arches, alcoves, and windows symbolize concepts. Staircases mark sequences. Windows frame abstract ideas. Alcoves hold moral lessons. The monastery's layout mirrors the palace, reinforcing memory through physical navigation. Walking through reality and imagination reinforces knowledge continuously. Transcription in the Scriptorium is also rehearsal. Every stroke of the quill mirrors mental steps through the palace. Letters and words float in imagined rooms, rehearsed as they are written. Writing is not just preservation, it is active reinforcement. Physical, mental, and emotional processes converge, embedding knowledge deeply and permanently. Even playful, whimsical details strengthen memory. Angels pointing to letters, cats guarding scrolls, dragons perched atop bookshelves. These unusual images create vivid hooks. Novelty and emotion make information durable, while the interconnected palace creates a structured yet delightful mental landscape. By evening, candles burn low, shadows lengthen, and Alred lies down in his narrow bed. Eyes closed, he walks mentally through corridors, chambers, and gardens. Passages, herbs, moral lessons, and historical events drift gently, settling softly. Sleep arrives gradually, carrying him into rest while the palace remains alive, silently preserving knowledge for the next day. The monk's method is effective precisely because it is gentle, patient, and holistic. No cramming, no urgency, no stress. Knowledge grows slowly, nurtured by imagination, rhythm, emotion, sensory experience, and daily life. Memory becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion. In quiet reflection, knowledge endures, preserved across decades, centuries, and lifetimes. Ultimately, the monk's secret is both simple and profound. Imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, sensory cues, and careful repetition. Knowledge is not stored mechanically. It is cultivated, walked with, nurtured, and woven into the rhythm of life. Alred's palace glows softly in the still night, a luminous inner world where memory thrives, accessible whenever needed, a serene, enduring companion in the quiet monastery. And as the monastery sinks deeper into the gentle quiet of night, Alred sits once more at his small wooden desk, candle flickering softly beside him. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees, and the faint toll of distant bells marks the slow passage of time. Inside, the stone corridors are silent, yet Alred's mind journeys endlessly through the chambers, courtyards, and corridors of his memory palace. Over decades, he has cultivated this inner landscape with patience and care, filling it with knowledge, moral lessons, historical events, and practical wisdom. Each figure, each letter, each room is deliberately positioned, creating a calm, luminous sanctuary for memory. Imagine the palace stretching before him. Sunlit chambers glow softly, letters and symbols floating above tables, gently illuminated as though lit from within. One corner contains a miniature garden, rosemary for clarity, chamomile for patience, sage for healing, each herb a mnemonic for practical knowledge. Another chamber contains figures enacting moral lessons, saints raising hands in blessing, disciples bowing in humility, dragons guarding doors of challenging passages. The palace is alive yet tranquil, structured yet flexible, a perfect environment for knowledge to grow naturally. The beauty of this system is its integration with daily life. Every physical step through the monastery corresponds to a mental step through the palace. Walking along cloister paths, mirrors strolling through the imagined gardens, climbing staircases, parallels progressing through chronological sequences of scripture or history. Mundane gestures, from folding robes to pouring water for plants, reinforce memory. Knowledge is not separated from life. It flows with daily rhythms, anchored in movement, observation, and sensory experience. Whimsy and novelty play an essential role. Angels perched on candles, cats curled around manuscripts, dragons guarding doorways. These unusual, playful images make memory durable. The brain favors vivid, emotionally resonant, or unexpected cues, and the monks intuitively exploited this principle. Humor and imagination anchor knowledge, making recall effortless and even enjoyable. Repetition occurs subtly. Melodic chanting embeds passages in the mind, aligning with visualized corridors and chambers. Rhythms of walking, tapping fingers, or footsteps echoing on stone floors synchronize with cognitive patterns. Learning thrives in rhythm, and monks take advantage of this naturally, allowing memory to deepen steadily without stress or pressure. Teaching novices further strengthens knowledge. Senior monks guide young ones through visualization. Place humility by the fountain. Let wisdom rest beneath the arch. Each novice builds a personal palace, adapting it to imagination while learning foundational principles. Instruction becomes both rehearsal and expansion. Knowledge is shared, internalized, and reinforced through this gentle mentorship. Sensory cues anchor knowledge even further. The cool stone beneath sandals, the faint scent of ink, the shimmer of sunlight through windows all serve as triggers for recall. A window may frame a moral lesson, an alcove, a theological argument, a flickering candle beside a floating letter. The physical monastery mirrors the mental palace, creating a living map of knowledge, tangible and navigable. Practical knowledge finds its place in the palace. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, genealogies, architectural measurements, and local histories are spatially organized. A garden may hold herbs for healing. A spiral staircase represents months, reigns, or historical sequences. Spatial, visual, emotional, and symbolic connections transform abstract information into tangible, navigable mental landscapes, embedding it firmly in memory. Emotion deepens retention. Miraculous events shine in radiant courtyards. Tragedies unfold under shadowed arches. Linking knowledge to feeling ensures recall is vivid, immersive, and meaningful. Learning becomes a lived experience rather than a mechanical task. Knowledge is felt as well as understood, internalized in mind and heart. Even the smallest gestures reinforce memory and rhythm. Gentle rocking while walking, tapping fingers, pacing quietly, these subtle motions synchronize with thought. Daily chores, folding robes, preparing meals, tending the garden become integrated into the choreography of learning. Knowledge is embodied, inseparable from both mind and body. Architecture reinforces the system. Spiral staircases, arches, alcoves, and windows serve as symbolic anchors. Staircases hold sequences of events. Windows frame abstract concepts. Alcoves contain moral lessons. Physical movement through the monastery mirrors navigation of the palace, reinforcing memory naturally. Walking in reality and imagination are intertwined. In the Scriptorium, copying manuscripts is also rehearsal. Each quill stroke mirrors a step through the palace. Letters and words float in imagined rooms, rehearsed and visualized. Writing is active reinforcement, not mere preservation. Physical, mental, and emotional processes converge, embedding knowledge deeply. Playful, whimsical details strengthen recall. Angels pointing to letters, cats guarding scrolls, dragons perched atop shelves. These unusual cues make information memorable. Novelty and emotion enhance durability, and the interconnected palace creates a structured yet delightful mental landscape. By evening, as candles dim and shadows stretch, Alred lies on his narrow bed. He closes his eyes and walks mentally through every corridor, chamber, and courtyard. Passages of scripture, historical events, herbal remedies, and moral lessons drift gently, settling softly. Sleep arrives gradually, carrying him into rest, while the palace remains alive, silently preserving knowledge for the next day. The monk's method is gentle, patient, and remarkably effective. No cramming, no urgency, no stress. Knowledge grows slowly, nurtured by imagination, rhythm, emotion, sensory experience, and daily practice. Memory becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion. In quiet reflection, knowledge endures across decades and centuries, held by those devoted to learning, contemplation, and devotion. Ultimately, the secret is profound yet simple. Imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, sensory cues, and patient repetition. Knowledge is not stored mechanically, it is cultivated, walked with, nurtured, and integrated into life. Alred's palace glows softly in the still night, a luminous inner world where memory thrives. Accessible whenever needed, a serene, enduring companion in the quiet rhythm of monastic life. And as the monastery sinks into the soft embrace of night, Alred sits quietly at his wooden desk, the faint scent of wax, ink, and parchment filling the air. Outside, the wind moves gently through the trees, and the occasional echo of a distant bell marks the passage of time. Within the stone walls, the world is hushed, yet Alred's mind wanders freely through the corridors, chambers, and gardens of his meticulously constructed memory palace. Over decades, this inner world has grown vast, intricate, and calm, each corner carefully filled with knowledge, moral lessons, historical events, and practical wisdom. Figures, letters, and symbols are arranged with intention, creating a serene sanctuary for memory that glows softly in the mind's eye. Picture the palace stretching before him. Archways open into sunlit chambers where letters float above tables or hover in mid-air, gently illuminated. In one corner, a miniature garden represents practical knowledge: rosemary for clarity, chamomile for patience, sage for healing, each herb a mnemonic for practical lessons or medicinal recipes. Another chamber contains figures enacting moral lessons: saints raising hands in blessing, disciples bowing in humility, dragons guarding doors that lead to challenging passages of scripture. The palace is alive yet tranquil, structured yet flexible, a sanctuary for learning and reflection. The brilliance of the monk's method lies in its integration with daily life. Every physical movement through the monastery mirrors a mental journey. A walk through the cloisters becomes a stroll through the imagined gardens. Climbing a spiral staircase mirrors moving through chronological sequences of scripture or historical events. Even small gestures, from folding robes to pouring water in the garden, reinforce memory. Knowledge flows with the rhythms of daily life, anchored in observation, movement, and sensory experience. Whimsy and novelty play a quiet but essential role. Angels perched on candles, cats curled around manuscripts, dragons guarding doorways. These playful, unusual images make memory durable. The brain naturally favors vivid, emotionally resonant, or unexpected cues, and the monks intuitively understood this. Humor and imagination anchor knowledge, making recall effortless and even delightful. Repetition is subtle yet effective. Melodic chanting embeds passages in the mind, aligning with visualized corridors, rooms, and figures. Rhythms of walking, tapping fingers, and footsteps echoing on stone floors synchronize with thought patterns. Learning thrives in rhythm, and monks allow memory to deepen over time without stress or pressure. Teaching novices further strengthens knowledge. Senior monks guide younger ones through visualization. Place humility by the fountain. Let wisdom rest beneath the arch. Each novice constructs a personal palace, adapting it to imagination while learning foundational principles. Instruction becomes both rehearsal and expansion. Knowledge is shared, internalized, and reinforced through gentle mentorship. Sensory anchoring is central. The cool stone underfoot, the faint scent of ink, the shimmer of sunlight through windows all serve as cues for recall. A window may frame a moral lesson, an alcove a theological argument, a candle flicker beside a floating letter. The monastery mirrors the mental palace, creating a living map of knowledge that is tangible and navigable. Practical knowledge is spatialized as well. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, genealogies, architectural measurements, and local histories are organized visually and spatially. A palace garden may hold herbs for treatment. A spiral staircase might represent months, reigns, or historical sequences. Spatial, visual, emotional, and symbolic connections transform abstract knowledge into tangible, navigable landscapes, embedding it firmly in memory. Emotion strengthens retention. Miracles shine in radiant courtyards. Tragedies unfold under shadowed arches. Linking knowledge to feeling ensures recall is vivid and meaningful. Learning becomes a lived, immersive experience rather than mechanical memorization. Knowledge is felt as well as understood. Even mundane gestures reinforce memory. Rocking gently while walking, tapping fingers, pacing quietly, these subtle actions synchronize with thought patterns. Daily activities, folding robes, preparing meals, tending gardens, become part of a broader choreography of learning. Knowledge is embodied, inseparable from mind and body. Architecture enhances the system. Spiral staircases, arches, alcoves, and windows serve as symbolic anchors. Staircases hold sequences of events. Windows frame abstract ideas. Alcoves contain moral lessons. Physical movement through the monastery mirrors mental navigation, reinforcing memory naturally. Walking in reality and imagination are intertwined. In the Scriptorium, transcription itself reinforces memory. Each quill stroke mirrors mental steps through the palace. Letters and words are visualized in rooms and rehearsed. Writing is active reinforcement, not mere preservation. Physical, mental, and emotional processes converge, embedding knowledge deeply. Playful, whimsical details strengthen recall. Angels pointing to letters, cats guarding scrolls, dragons perched atop shelves. These unusual cues make information memorable. Novelty and emotion enhanced retention, and the interconnected palace creates a structured yet delightful mental landscape. By evening, candles burn low, shadows stretch, and Alred lies on his narrow bed. Eyes closed, he mentally walks through every corridor, chamber, and garden. Passages of scripture, historical events, herbal remedies, and moral lessons drift gently, settling softly. Sleep arrives gradually, carrying him into rest, while the palace remains alive, silently preserving knowledge for the next day. The monk's method is remarkable for its gentleness and effectiveness. No cramming, no urgency, no stress. Knowledge grows slowly, nurtured by imagination, rhythm, emotion, sensory experience, and daily practice. Memory becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion. In quiet reflection, knowledge endures across decades and centuries, held by those devoted to learning, contemplation, and devotion. Ultimately, the secret is profound yet simple. Imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, sensory cues, and patient repetition. Knowledge is not stored mechanically. It is cultivated, walked with, nurtured, and integrated into daily life. Alred's palace glows softly in the still night, a luminous inner world where memory thrives, accessible whenever needed, a serene, enduring companion in the quiet monastery. And as the monastery settles into the deepest quiet of night, Alred lies in his narrow bed, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. Outside, the wind murmurs softly through the trees, and the faint distant toll of the bell marks the gentle passage of time. Inside, the stone walls absorb sound, creating a hushed cocoon. But within Alred's mind, the memory palace is alive, luminous, vast, and tranquil. Every corridor, chamber, courtyard, and garden is arranged with care, each letter, figure, and symbol deliberately placed, forming a serene landscape where knowledge, wisdom, and practical skills reside in harmony. Imagine him walking through the palace one last time before sleep carries him fully into rest. Archways open into glowing rooms where letters float above tables, softly illuminated. In one chamber, a garden blooms with rosemary for clarity, chamomile for patience, and sage for healing, herbs representing practical knowledge, moral reflection, and ancient wisdom. In another, figures enact moral lessons, saints raising hands in blessing, disciples bowing in humility, dragons guarding doorways that lead to the most challenging passages. The palace is alive yet calm, structured yet flexible, a private sanctuary for thought, memory, and reflection. The genius of this method lies in its seamless integration with everyday life. Each physical movement through the monastery mirrors a mental journey. Walking along the cloisters becomes a stroll through the imagined gardens. Climbing a spiral staircase reflects chronological progressions of scripture or historical events. Mundane gestures, from folding robes to pouring water for the garden, reinforce memory. Knowledge is not separate from life. It flows with rhythm, movement, and observation, becoming a natural, living part of daily experience. Humor, novelty, and imagination anchor memory deeply. Angels perched on candles, cats curled around manuscripts, dragons guarding hallways. These playful, unusual images create durable cues. The human brain favors vivid, emotionally resonant, or unexpected stimuli, and monks intuitively applied this principle centuries before psychology formalized it. Humor and imagination make knowledge memorable, engaging, and even delightful, turning the palace into a landscape both functional and enchanting. Repetition occurs naturally through rhythm and reflection. Melodic chanting embeds passages in the mind, synchronized with mental corridors, chambers, and figures. Physical rhythms, rocking while walking, tapping fingers, footsteps echoing on stone support, recall. Learning thrives in rhythm, and monks allow memory to deepen gradually, without stress, urgency, or force. Knowledge grows steadily, rooted in patience and attentive care. Teaching novices reinforces memory further. A senior monk guides a young one through visualization. Place humility by the fountain. Let wisdom rest beneath the arch. Each novice builds a personal palace, adapting it to imagination while learning foundational principles. Instruction becomes both rehearsal and expansion. Knowledge is shared, internalized, and strengthened through gentle mentorship. Sensory cues anchor memories subtly and effectively. The cool stone beneath sandals, the faint scent of ink and beeswax, the shimmer of morning sunlight all serve as triggers for recall. Windows may frame moral lessons, alcoves hold theological arguments, and flickering candles mark passages of scripture. The monastery mirrors the mental palace, creating a living map of knowledge that is tangible, navigable, and deeply ingrained. Practical knowledge finds its place. Herbal remedies, astronomical charts, genealogies, architectural measurements, and local histories are organized spatially and symbolically. A garden holds medicinal herbs. A spiral staircase represents months, reigns, or historical events. Visual, spatial, emotional, and symbolic links transform abstract knowledge into tangible, retrievable landscapes, firmly embedded in memory. Emotion strengthens recall. Miraculous events shine in radiant courtyards. Tragedies unfold under shadowed arches. Linking knowledge to feeling ensures it is remembered vividly and meaningfully. Memory becomes immersive, a lived experience rather than a mechanical exercise. Knowledge is felt as well as understood, internalized in mind, heart, and imagination. Even mundane gestures reinforce rhythm and memory. Rocking while walking, tapping fingers, pacing quietly, subtle actions synchronize with thought patterns. Daily tasks, folding robes, tending gardens, preparing meals integrate into the choreography of learning. Knowledge is embodied, inseparable from both mind and body. Architecture amplifies the system. Spiral staircases, arches, alcoves, and windows serve as symbolic anchors. Staircases hold sequences of events. Windows frame abstract ideas. Alcoves contain moral lessons. Physical movement through the monastery mirrors mental navigation, reinforcing memory naturally. Walking in reality and imagination is intertwined, creating a living, retrievable system. In the Scriptorium, copying manuscripts is also rehearsal. Each quill stroke mirrors steps through the palace. Letters and words are visualized, rehearsed, and integrated. Writing is active reinforcement, not mere preservation. Physical, mental, and emotional processes converge, embedding knowledge deeply and permanently. Playful, whimsical elements strengthen memory. Angels pointing to letters, cats guarding scrolls, dragons perched atop shelves. These unusual, vivid cues make information memorable. Novelty, emotion, and imagination enhance retention. The interconnected palace creates a structured, yet delightful, mental landscape. By night's deepest hour, Alred closes his eyes completely, lying still in his narrow bed. He mentally walks through every corridor, chamber, and garden. Scripture, history, moral lessons, and practical knowledge drift gently, settling like soft dust. Sleep envelops him gradually, carrying him into rest while the palace remains alive, silently preserving knowledge for the next day, ready to awaken with him at dawn. The monk's method is remarkable for its patience, gentleness, and profound effectiveness. No cramming, no urgency, no stress. Knowledge grows slowly, nurtured by imagination, rhythm, emotion, sensory experience, and daily practice. Memory becomes a living landscape, a sanctuary, a companion. In the quiet, it endures across decades, centuries, and lifetimes, held by those devoted to learning, reflection, and devotion. Ultimately, the secret is both simple and profound. Imagination, rhythm, emotion, architecture, sensory cues, and careful repetition. Knowledge is not stored mechanically, it is cultivated, walked with, nurtured, and integrated into life. Alred's palace glows softly in the still night, a luminous inner world where memory thrives. Accessible whenever needed, a serene, enduring companion in the quiet monastery. And as the monastery sleeps, as the candle flames burn low, the secret lives on, quietly whispering the ancient wisdom of 1,000 years. preserved not in ink alone, but in the luminous, patient architecture of the human mind.